You like that too?
Well, yeah, because then you know.
Okay.
That happened the week before.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Did it do it, Randy?
You're recording.
Oh, I'm recording. Okay, it's pretty frozen, I'd say.
No, but that was last week's.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's start. Let's look at some of this. Before we get to it, let's go through some of the things that are on our packet. I want to show you what he's going to be talking about here. On our first page, you can see we have here a picture of the showbread. See,
It does look like
see
pancakes,
this?
yeah.
And this is the bread of the tabernacle. So we can read in Leviticus chapter 24 where it talks about how these are to be made. When we were in Exodus, we also learned about this in our study of Exodus. But it's what it is basically is this is in the tabernacle and then later on in the temple. Before you get to the Holy of Holies, there would have been three places where there would have been the altar of incense, there would have been the menorah on this side, and on that side would have been this table of showbread that would have been set up. And the Lord wanted 12 loaves of bread. Now they're drawn this way, and a lot of the images that I saw show them this way, but most Jewish teachings don't show them in this little pancake stage. They show them in a special form. It doesn't really matter, but just out of interest, you know, they show them in a wedge form. They're all identical sized. They're made in forms so they would be identical size. Why would that be important? Because they represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And you don't want one to be bigger than the other because then that shows favoritism, right? So they would have forms there that they would make them in square forms. Also, there were to be, the instruction is that they were to be in 2 rows. So while many of the images show them drawn this way, more than likely they would have been 6 loaves out this way and then 6 loaves out this way. The size of the table of showbread is about the size of this because it was the same size as the Ark of the Covenant. And so it would have been about this size, and it had ridges of crown molding around it, and they kept oil and frankincense and some various things on it. It was very important that this showbread, which was actually... The name means bread of presence or bread of face is what showbread, the word means. The reason being that the priests would eat this bread in the presence of the Lord. Here's how it would work. They would bring in on every Sabbath 12 hot loaves of bread, each one representing one of the tribes of Israel. They would lay them out. They would pour the frankincense and the oil and the things that would need to be on it, and it would sit there in the tabernacle, or later the temple, in that special place where it would be kept over there. At the end of the week, that bread was then consumed by the priests. So anyone who was of the Levitical tribe could come and participate in that, and so it would be a time of fellowship, of being in the presence or in the face of the Lord, and so that's why it was called the showbread. And so Jewish tradition teaches, now this is Jewish tradition, this is not scripture, that the bread was supernaturally always hot. Like it was freshly made during the week that it was on the table. That it never cooled, that it never got stale or never hardened while it was on there. That's their, huh?
That's stale bread.
Yeah, exactly. And the teaching there being, of course, that, you know, God always wants his relationship with us to be fresh and just, and never stale. And so anyway, that's the teaching that they would have on that. But the main part for our story to understand is that this bread would have been made every week, every Sabbath. It would have been changed out, and those 12 loaves that were there would have been replaced with 12 new hot loaves, and then those older bread loaves would be eaten by the priests that would be there. And so you can read about it this week in your study. It tells you exactly how it was made, and that it was to be for Aaron and his sons. And then the next page, Exodus 25, I've given you some scripture there that just tells you how the table of showbread was made, if you're just interested in learning a little bit about how the table of showbread looked. And then we're going to get down here, and I'm going to wait just a minute before we get into that. We have a scripture in Matthew where this particular story is going to be discussed, and we'll get onto that. So for now, that's all we need to look at. So let's look back at chapter 20 and go through some of our information on this. So David fled from...
21.
Oh,
21.
sorry. Now David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he saw David, and he said to him, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" So he's now come to Nob. Remember we discussed earlier on several chapters ago that Shiloh was originally where the tabernacle was, but Shiloh was destroyed. And when Shiloh was destroyed, the priesthood and the tabernacle and those things went to Nob, the town of Nob. And so this is where the priesthood is now going to be. And Ahimelech is the high priest there at the time. He is one of the great-grandson, I can't remember, of Eli. Remember the old priest, heavy, fell, broke his neck at the beginning of our chapter, of our story of Samuel. He was the high priest. And so he says, David, why are you alone? Why would that be something he'd be even noticing?
Because
Always
troops with him.
Okay, because David's known, isn't he? David is well known for his military prowess and for his importance in the administration that's going on at the time. Why would he be out there wandering around all by himself with no one with him?
Don't you imagine he was afraid of him a little bit, about him being by himself, because he knew the story of him killing the
Well, that's what it says.
giant?
Well, he was afraid when he saw David. Now, I don't think he was afraid of David. I think he was afraid of what's going on. Why have you gotten separated from everyone? Why are you here by yourself? This is an odd situation. Is something wrong? It's more that type of a thing for him. He wouldn't be afraid of David because David poses no threat to the priesthood. David is a righteous man. He knows the priesthood is God's servants. There would be no reason for him to be afraid of David. But David being by himself is a weird situation. So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you or what I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place.'" Okay, is that true?
No, it's a lie.
It is a lie that David has come up with. And not only that, he's put false words in the mouth of Saul. He's created a lie and put false words in the mouth of Saul. And then just to make it interesting, he adds a few details at the end and says, "And all my men," which you can't see him right now, but they're somewhere else over here.
I've sent them away.
Isn't it funny how with a lie, how that happens? I mean, come on, when you tell a lie, it's like you just can't stop your mouth. And these little details just keep coming out because you think it makes the lie just that much more believable, right? I mean, that's human nature. It's what we do. And if you went back and saw a picture of yourself doing that, you would probably think it looks just as silly as what David is doing here, trying to get out of trouble. And so in verse 3 he says, "Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found." So what do you have on hand, or give it in my hand, is just a way of saying what's available. You know, what we might say something similar when we say, "Hey, what do you have on hand? Do you have flour in your cupboard?" Or yeah. And so he's just saying, I need, 5 loaves of bread. Well, obviously David's not going to eat 5 loaves of bread sitting there by himself. Why would he ask for 5 loaves of bread, do you think?
For all those people that he's
Well, first of all, he's got people, got to feed. And then second of all, David knows that he may not have supplies for a while, and he simply doesn't know what's going to happen to him next. So he's preparing himself for whatever is going to happen, but it really does make the lie look good, doesn't it? When he says, you got 5 loaves of bread, got a lot of hungry guys to feed out here somewhere. There's such and such a place. And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread on hand. Common bread just being what you and I would eat every day in our sandwiches. But there is holy bread. So this holy bread that he's talking about is the showbread loaves that we discussed a little bit earlier. If the young men have at least kept themselves from women. So Leviticus chapter 15, you can go to verses 16 through 18 and find out that in sexual activity, although God certainly ordained it and there was nothing wrong with it, it made the man and the woman both unholy for a period of time. It had to do with bodily things. And so if they participated in that for that period of time, they wouldn't be available for certain activities that would have to be at the temple and that sort of thing until there was a purification. And so he's telling David that at the very least they need to have kept themselves away from women in order to eat the holy bread, because that's all that's available to them. And so David answers the priest and he says, well, truly, women have been kept from us for about 3 days since I came out. Well, that's good luck. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessels this day. And so all David is doing is kind of just weaving a story together here, saying, oh yeah, me and all my men, we haven't done anything like that in 3 days, and this bread is going to be used in a secular way. It's not going to be holy, so the bags and the things that we'll be carrying it in are fine. Everything's good. You can just, it's not a problem here. Now, I have to tell you that there is an issue with a lot of people in what the priest Ahimelech does here. Because if you read back in our chapter in Exodus, it says in verse 9, and it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place. For it is most holy to him from the offerings of the Lord made by fire in a perpetual statute. That's from Leviticus talking about this bread. So the two ways of looking at it that I can find that most people say is that, first of all, God never says that someone besides Aaron can't eat it. And I struggle with that one, because I read it more that it says here that it's to be eaten by Aaron and his sons. That sort of eliminates anyone who isn't a son of Aaron. And so, and they're saying, well, it's not specifically someone else, so it could be someone else, particularly another Levite. Well, that's true in the fact that the Levites do eat it, the ones that are there. But is David a Levite? Mm-hmm. What tribe is David from? Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah, and Saul's from Benjamin, and so there's different tribes that are involved in different areas of this. So it is surprising to me, at least, that Ahimelech takes the showbread and gives it to David to eat. Now, that is going to bring us to the one place I wanted you to look, which is Matthew 12, 1 through 8. Look in your packet. This is a New Testament reference that I'm going to take you to here now. When it says, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And so this is the time when Jesus is going through the grain fields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said, hey, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful for them to do on the Sabbath. Now look, he's going to use the story that we're talking about today, and he says, have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those that were with him?
There was no one with him.
Okay. How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. And then he begins to go on and say, or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? He's going on to teach a message of that the Son of Man of the Lord is Lord even of the Sabbath, is what he's teaching here. But for our purposes today, I'm not going to get into that teaching, but for our purposes today, Jesus uses this when his disciples are going through the field and they're plucking off the heads of grain. There is nothing in the Mosaic law that says you can't pluck off heads of grain, but the Pharisees, come on you guys, you have been with me especially for a long time, know it's those laws that the Pharisees just kept building all around it, and by the time this law comes to this point, the Pharisees had a law that was harvesting. If you were to pluck a head of some grain off, now you're harvesting your crops on the Sabbath, and that is against the Mosaic law. So they had taken it about 10 steps further down the line than it needed to be, and that's why Jesus isn't breaking the law on the Sabbath. He's simply breaking the Pharisaic law that was on the Sabbath, which that was certainly not of equal value of the Mosaic law. So what they were doing was not wrong, but the Pharisees saw it as wrong, and so he uses our story today of David, and he says, even David got to eat the showbread when he was starving, and my men are starving, and they're going to do this whether you like it or not, because in fact they're not breaking the law, but on top of that, even if they were breaking the law, they're starving. And so man was not made, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. So the man is always the most important part of this. Now, I will tell you this. When I read chapter 12, 1 through 8, when it talks about your friends, the people that were with him, and how it was not lawful for those, I don't know why that's there. That's all I can tell you. I don't know.
Well, it's possible that he did have guys with him and he had sent them someplace else. And when he came to Doeg, they weren't with him.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
It's a possibility
Jesus
that
said
he
they
had.
were with him.
I know. And so I read that, and I think his companions that were with him, and it talks about it in 2 different places. It's a really confusing thing because when David flees, we have no indication that he's taking anyone with him. But it would appear that somebody was with him. Some companions went with him that we don't know about. Now, that still makes a lot of his story a lie, but some of the points that he's making here are perhaps not.
But Jesus would know.
Jesus would know far better than me. That's true. So it's an interesting little tidbit that's put in there in Matthew, and that Jesus refers to in this particular story. So let's just go on a little bit from there now that you've had that little thing nugget to chew on.
Kathy, just a question.
Sure.
Would David, even though he's not crowned king yet, would he be in a place of favor because of who he is to become?
You mean, is that why he's receiving bread? Is that what you're meaning?
Or is it because he's notorious?
Well, there is that is, he still has...
You mean, is Ahimelech afraid of him or something?
No, but
I'm not understanding, maybe.
But who's doing
well, it seemed clear in my mind, but I'm not having trouble explaining. But the fact that he is the chosen, even though it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
But is that maybe why he is receiving favor?
From Doeg?
Well, maybe not
haven't got
them
to Doeg yet.
knowingly, but I mean, he is God's favored
I think
person.
he's receiving this bread, and he is because Ahimelech knows that David is a very well-respected man in the kingdom, that he works for King Saul and does things that bring great favor to King Saul, that he's well-respected in Israel. The songs that are written about him are obvious. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that is. And it appears that David is in dire need of some bread. And so I think, is it God's plan and purpose? Of course, God's always instrumental in how these things fall out. So all of that probably plays part in it. So let's just see what he does from here, though. So David's told him the story, and in verse 6 it says, "So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away." And that goes back to the story of what I just told you. Every Sabbath, it would be rotated out, the hot bread brought in, the older bread brought back out, and then the priests would eat it. And so he's talking about, I have 10 loaves of bread that we've just brought out from there. Now we're going to go and meet a new person. Verse 7, "Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord," meaning that he's somehow in the presence of the priests. What is he doing there? There could be a number of reasons he's there. We'll go over some of those, but he's detained before the Lord in the presence of the priests, and his name was Doeg. He was an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. So he's an Edomite. What does that mean right off the bat? He's not a Jew. He's not an Israelite. He is there at the tabernacle, or at least in the presence of the Lord. So, or could be a multitude of reasons that he's there. Let me give you some of the reasons that are possible that he's there. One, he could be doing business for the king. He could be there taking business for the king. Two, he could be well, primarily, the reason why he's there is for that. My question on why would an Edomite be in the service of Saul would lead us to something else, in that he may be a servant to Saul because he could be a slave captured in war. He could have had some real talents that Saul needed to use in his administration, and so he kept him, but he could have been a slave that had been captured, an Edomite slave, captured at that time. Something a little more far-fetched, but still a possibility, is he could have been a Gentile who converted into Judaism for whatever reasons. I find that far-fetched because he doesn't appear to me to have any godliness in him as we move along, but that is one of the things that's floated out there as to why an Edomite, not a Jew, not an Israeli man, would be there in the presence of the Lord doing business. I think more than likely he probably was a slave captured and used in Saul's service, but that's not said in Scripture, so that's just me. All right, and verse 8, and wait, I skipped to that, didn't there? So, an Edomite who belonged to Saul. And David, so that's all that's said about him right here, okay, in this particular place. Just put Doeg in your mind, because we're going to meet him again here in a little bit. But for now, that's all that's said. He was there in the presence of the Lord. And David said to Ahimelech, "Is there on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." Okay, there's another half-truth. He didn't have any swords or weapons with him because he had fled. But it wasn't because Saul had sent him out in such a rush. Come on, do you think Saul would send his head general out without any weapons and say, go, go, go? Yeah, immediately Ahimelech should have said, that seems odd to me. But then again, Saul's an odd king, so there you go. So the priest said, here is an interesting little tie-in to a couple of chapters ago. So the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none other except that one here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." And so the last time if you go back a few chapters ago, the last time we saw David and he had the sword of Goliath, what had he just done?
Chopped his head off.
Chopped off his head, and then he did what with it?
He took it to the...
Put it in his tent.
He put it in his tent, didn't he? Okay, he put that, and that was where we saw it at the time. We know that sword was a big sword. We went through all of the armor of Goliath was huge. This is a 9-10 foot man with, hundreds of pounds of armor on him. The sword itself was over 15 pounds, if I remember correctly. I mean, it's a big item here for little David to have. And so somehow that sword has ended up in Nob at the tabernacle, kept with the sacred garments. Because what is the ephod? The ephod is that garment that the high priest is going to wear, and so that's kept in a sacred place there where all the priests are, and so somehow the sword of Goliath is wrapped in a cloth and kept there with the sacred garments of the priests.
Even though it doesn't say here, does David know that it's there?
Well,
It doesn't sound like
it doesn't sound like it. So how all of that worked from going from David's tent to the tabernacle and Nob, I really can't tell you. I really don't know. But we do know that it is now it's now going to be there, and good luck for David, right? Because he doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
Good luck and bad luck. It's gonna be a burden for David here in just a little bit. And so he says, "Give it to me." So now here we go. David is going to be on the road again, and he is going to flee. So David flees to Gath. Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. All right, stop for a minute. Do you remember who was from Gath? Goliath was from Gath. Very good. So Goliath is from Gath, and David flees to Gath. Does that seem like a smart plan?
No.
It really doesn't, does it? It doesn't seem to be a smart plan at all. Now, keep in mind, what is David carrying with him? Do you think that there are many of them there in Gath?
No.
Do you think people are going to recognize a small man carrying a 15-pound sword with him in the city of Gath, the home of Goliath? We know from Scripture that Goliath had brothers and a father, and from this area.
You wouldn't want to do that.
You wouldn't want to do that, you would think, right? So this is maybe not the wisest choice that David has made. So he goes into Gath, and in verse 11 it says, "And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s?'" All right, two interesting things there. What do they recognize David as? King of the land. This is something that the majority of the people of Israel don't even really recognize at the time. Because Saul is still in control. Saul is still the man there. But these people recognize that David is the one who is king of the land. That tells us there are a group of people out there who know what's going on. Some of them probably from Israel, but also from surrounding areas. These people knew that when a lot of people in Israel were not recognizing it, at least not that we see. And they also had heard that little dance that the women did. Those women caused a lot of trouble. They caused a lot of trouble. Because here, that made Saul mad, it gets David in trouble, and then it just gets spread out, even without telephones or email, and no texting. It gets spread out to where these people, word for word, know this little song and know that this was done. Now, 12. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. Why would he be afraid following those words that he just heard?
They're going to know who he is.
They're going to know.
They know
Yeah.
who he is. Did he think he could just slip right in there with wagging a sword and slip right in there and they're not going to recognize him? I don't know. But he comes in and immediately they peg him for who he is, and he knows he's in big trouble because he is world known, well, at least in the area known, for being what? The slayer of Goliath. And so they know that, and so he's very afraid because it appears to me that this happens. Now I'm going to give you a little extra note outside of this chapter, just 1 second. It says, "And so he changed his behavior before them, pretending madness in his hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let the saliva fall down on his beard." All right, so David is deciding that he's not ever going to get out of there alive. That seems a little abrupt given the fact that he just walks in, he finds out they know about him, and then he immediately slips into this madness. So what I want you to do is look in your packet, and you will see that Psalms chapter 56 is in your packet. Look at that. Psalms chapter 56. Look to how Psalms 56 is addressed. It says, to the chief musician set to the silent dove in distant lands. Must have been a very popular song. A michtam of David when the Philistines captured him in Gath. So what we're not really seeing in this chapter fully is that when David comes in and they recognize who he is, what happens? He gets captured, doesn't he? They take him in to the king because his background is already well known. And so he begins to write this story of what happens. I hope this week you'll get a moment to read chapter 56 of Psalms because it talks about it. And while you're doing that, make a little note on your packet that David is in prison or at least in captivity while he's writing this, and so the words will make more sense to you as you read them. I will read you one little part. I love the part where it says, verse 8. It says, "You number my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle." Are they not in your book? When I cry out to you, then my enemies will turn back. This I know because God is for me. And that's where one of the popular thing that you can find in Israel are the bottles that you can capture tears in. And it comes from this particular verse, and that God keeps all of our tears in a bottle because they're very sacred to him. And so that comes from this particular one.
He's got a
big bottle for you, a gallon jug,
Yeah.
you think? And so it appears that David has been captured, and so he fakes this madness where, the beard boy, that is a real slam to a man of that day. Anytime you messed with their beard, that just was not done. It was an indignation to them that they didn't. That they didn't tolerate. One of the things that we're going to see far later on down the road is that a bunch of the Israel warriors are going to be captured, and they cut off half of their beard, and it's done as a horrible slam.
What book was it that we studied about beards?
We've been probably at Exodus and Ezekiel, and all of them. It's just a well-known cultural fact, and so he's letting that be messy. It says he wrote scratched on the doors of the gate. There are a couple of different scribbled on the gate doors. A couple of different interpretations say that he wrote weird statements and strange things, and you can just imagine how it was. All of this was his plan to get out of this area. And so Achish says to his servants, "Look, you see this man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of a madman?" Or I can imagine him saying, "Have I need of another madman in my life? Some other crazy man?" Remember at this time culturally that the people who were insane at that time were thought to have been afflicted by the gods. And so if you were afflicted by the gods and you were possessed or mad or insane, what was traditionally done is you were just left alone. You were left alone because if the gods were dealing with you, the human beings didn't want to mess with you. And so he says, "You've brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence. Shall this fellow come into my house?" And so we can see that David's little trick has worked pretty well there. So I will end this chapter by stating that there's also here another psalm for you to look at. It's in your packet. It is Psalms 34. I thought it was interesting that, at least in my translation, when I was reading it, it says, "A psalm of David when he pretended madness before," and it says, Abimelech, which isn't even the right name, who drove him away, and he departed. So anyway, we know from our story that it's Achish, and that he this is when he leaves after the guy says, just take him away. I don't need another madman. Look how he starts it out. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. I sought out the Lord, and he heard me. He delivered me from all of my fears. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who desires life and loves many days that he may see good? So you can see from this that David is what? Happy to be out of Gath. Happy to be away from Achish. And so he writes this particular psalm for that reason. Right, can turn that off for now. Does anyone have any questions?